All right, now I think we're officially recording. All right, I have Roaming Millennial here, and again, Rohan from being libertarian identity has not changed at all. I just wanted to bring her back on because I actually got a bunch of requests or questions to ask you. So I kind of want to go through everything, but I really want to know your opinion on a lot of stuff that's actually happened in about the last month or so. So I first of all, I have to know your opinion on the WWE Trump tweet, the little video he had.
Well, as someone who grew up watching WWE when they were little, back in the golden days when it was actually The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin and, like Triple H and stuff
The
like
Hardy
that.
Boys.
Exactly. With Lita, I thought she was the coolest, most badass person ever. I thought it was funny. I thought it was hilarious. I wasn't aware that Trump ever appeared on WWE, so I thought it was funny. And then, so I saw it first on Twitter, and then the meme started making its rounds on Instagram and all social media, and I was like, haha. Then moved on with my life, right? Which I think is the extent that most people took it. And then, I don't really watch much CNN or Fox or anything like that, but I've been trying to make it more of an effort just because I'm actually curious as to how they still think they're news. And it was funny because for, I think, like a good 2 hours when I was watching CNN, that was all they were talking about. And, they were trying to push this narrative of how it's inciting violence and blah, blah, blah. When, I mean, really, it was a meme, a funny meme and just a GIF. And now with this whole blackmail thing, which I think I'm going to be talking about in my video tomorrow, it's pretty shocking. And I think, this combined with the, I guess, Russia fake news situation that kind of came to a head last week, I just really don't see how CNN is going to continue like this because, I mean, you're supposed to report the news if you're a journalist, not make the news because of your shocking amount of lacking journalistic integrity.
You just answered the other two questions I had. Okay, never mind. I guess we can move on. No, it's just a little weird that this actually all came out. And so there's Tucker Carlson has a show, and I think his ratings have been spiking up like crazy now. And I read this article that said the new generation is actually going to be more conservative. It's going to be the largest, by population. So I feel like the liberal media is actually kind of pushing everyone over to the right, and they're going to be wondering, like, why are all these kids ended up, being right-leaning? And okay, so that's on top of that, so I recently read something that you wrote that kind of you came out as a Christian. How has the backlash, or I guess the reaction to that been so far?
It's overall been actually like pretty positive. I've had a lot of my viewers actually happen to be Christian as well. So, a lot of them were saying that like, oh, it's great that you're, I guess, coming out as a Christian. Always suspected you might be one. This will be a cool, because, the reason why I'm doing this is that I would like to start making more videos on my channel kind of about religion and its role in society, secularization of the West, stuff like that. So nothing to do with proselytizing, Christian apologetics, nothing to do with that, because I think that is kind of outside of the scope of my channel. But at the same time, I know that if I talk about those issues, people are going to be wondering about what my beliefs are personally. And, I have a website now, roamingmillennial.com, and I have like this Ask section, and I was surprised that, like, even though I've never talked about, religion at all pretty much on my channel, those were most of the questions I was getting. So that's kind of like why I decided to write that and just be like, okay, yes, guys, I am Christian. Not going to be making videos about it because that just, I've had pastors and people like approach me like, you should make a video about this, like spread the gospel. It's like, yeah, but this is my work. You know what I mean? And I just feel like it would be inappropriate. I mean, if people want to know, then like I'm happy to answer those questions. But I don't want to turn into some apologist. And so like I'm hoping to explore it a little bit more. Especially I've talked about Islamic extremists and how they're affecting the West, like with terrorism, but I've never really talked about religion, as ideologies and secularization and stuff like that. And more and more, I think that might be an interesting discussion to bring into, especially, because of how increasingly secular we're becoming.
Do you find it difficult to balance, ideology versus, I guess, more empirical scientific evidence these days? I know a lot of people, there's still like young earth creationists and stuff like that. I don't know exactly where you fall you know, in that spectrum somewhere? I'm just wondering. I always like to ask this question.
Personally, no. So the thing is, like, my dad was kind of like a Christmas Easter Catholic, you know, and I went to Catholic girls' school for a time, and I did a little bit of like I went to Bible camp a couple, like for, you know, I think there were like 2 summers where I went kind of on and off, but like overall, you know, I don't consider my upbringing a Christian one really, especially like, you know, I practice more now, and so the way I plan on bringing up my children is you know, Christian in a sense, and that's not what my experience was growing up. So you know, when I started, I guess, I don't know, kind of looking more into like, because I started out really as an atheist, even though I was like grew up in this kind of nominally Christian setting. I started out as an atheist, and so you know, my approach to science and evolution and accepting science has not changed, right? Because that, I mean, that was formed first before anything else. And I think, you know, there are the young earth creationists and all that, but when you look at the majority of Christians in the United States or even all over the world, like most of us accept evolution, most of us embrace science. It's, you know, it's not really a question of how the earth was, or like how the earth was created, that I think we look to things like philosophy, theology, and stuff like that. It's more a question of why to me. So, you know, in my opinion, there's no conflict there, and I would never try to deny science or try to stop the progression of science for ideological reasons.
Yeah, it's got to be a little difficult, I believe, just because, like you said, a lot of people are, not a lot of people, with the secular groups definitely growing rapidly in this country. And when this, they had Bill Nye versus Ken Ham, I'm sure that wasn't, you know, when things like that kind of happen, I'm sure it makes it a little bit more, at least difficult or frustrating to distance yourself from, you know, the loonies or the crazy people like that.
Yeah, and that's what is frustrating, because you know, a lot of the times when they have these debates or these conversations, they always choose the you know, the Christian fundamentalists who, I mean, it's kind of like with the Islamic extremism, like they don't represent the average Muslim, they don't represent the average Christian. And you know, that's not to say that no, all Christians believe in evolution. Clearly they don't. There are tons of Christians that don't believe in evolution, but you know, I think people who aren't familiar with Christian communities, just like regular ones in the United States, the average Christian, God believing in person, or you know, church going person still believes in evolution. And I think, you know, the way that secularization is happening right now, it's in very concentrated areas, you know, on the coast, New York, California, these big city areas. And so I think, you know, there's an increasing divide culturally and, you know, just even straight up geographically between those who are Christian and those who are secular. And I think, you know, that lack of cross communication can kind of lead to misconceptions that people might have about Christians.
Okay, and what about, I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this question without it being too vague. Just when it comes to, I guess your faith, like you said, you kind of went from being, you know, you were more atheistic, right, in belief, and kind of transitioned, or were you agnostic? I'm sorry, I just want to clarify that before.
Yeah, for sure. So when I was about like 14 or 15, this all started happening when I was a teenager. You know, I was like militantly atheist. I read all of, you know, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens. I was really into that. So I was kind of approaching things from a more reductionist standpoint. But then when I was a little bit older, like maybe over the next year or so, I started also looking into more philosophy. And so I started off with the Greek philosophers, Aristotle and Plato. And when I started reading things like, you know, Allegory of the Cave, Theory of Forms, Theory of the Unmoved Mover, things like that, then I started kind of becoming more agnostic and slowly transitioning into becoming a deist. And this was all from a, you know, completely philosophical, theoretical standpoint. So at this point, it was not about religion to me. So, you know, that I was kind of playing around with that for, you know, the next year. And then, you know, as I continued reading about philosophy, I, of course, moved into the Christian philosophers, people like St. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas. And then, you know, like just kind of like introspection with who I was as a person. I think, you know, if you believe in a, I guess, cosmic karma, like balance, theory of forms, if we apply that to person, like to people, like if there's the ultimate bad and the ultimate good, we are somewhere in between that. And I think Christianity is one of the religions that actually offers a way to balance what is good with what is evil, and to offer personal redemption, and just, you know, knowing who I am as a person, and, you know, the kind of struggles that I've had with morality and stuff, it made the most sense to me. And so that's kind of the not very inspiring, not very Hallmark story of my faith progression.
And what's your opinion on the politicians in DC? Well, pretty much throughout the country. I I want to say masquerading. That's obviously my biased opinion as Christians, but what do you think about them kind of, doing things, air quote, under the name of Christianity?
I think it's actually really frustrating. And, the thing is, I don't think we've had an actual, like, I think maybe George Bush was a real Christian. Perhaps Reagan. I think Kennedy was one of those nominal Irish Catholics. I don't think Trump is Christian. I don't think Obama is Christian. Not that I think Obama's Muslim. I did think he was just, just like a
You don't have to
agnostic,
clarify, I
secular.
promise.
Right. Yeah. So, and, to me, it is kind of frustrating how in American politics they always have to make this this grab for the evangelical vote by saying like, oh yeah, God and country. It's like, you guys don't believe this. I mean, like, I think it's like a very rare politician that will actually be a Christian. And, personally, I'm someone who I wouldn't really, I wouldn't mind voting for a Jewish person. I wouldn't mind voting for a Christian person. I think the way politicians use Christianity is pretty much just, it's lip service. They're not actually Christian. And, it is frustrating when they try to use Christianity as a defense for their political agendas, which both sides do, right? Republicans with gay marriage, Democrats trying to push a socialist agenda, stuff like that. Like they'll both do that. And I think it's wrong in both cases.
Have you ever visited or traveled to kind of the Bible Belt in America?
I've traveled through it. I've never spent a lot of time there, but when I was in Utah, the people at my church were overwhelmingly from the Bible Belt because Utah is the least Christian state. It's the only state where Christians are the minority because I think it's something like Mormon. Overall, yeah, extremely Mormon. So there's a big missionary push, and so a lot of people from the Bible Belt, missionary push, but a lot of people from the Bible Belt are actually moving to Utah to try and start mission projects. And so a lot of people that I met there were from Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, stuff like that.
What's your opinion on what's going on in local and state governments over there, trying to push more, I guess, creationism in publicly funded schools and colleges, universities, stuff like that?
I have no issue with religion classes being taught in school. So, if there is a religion class where they're learning about Christianity, I think absolutely teach the creation story. But I think, in science class, you teach science, and this isn't to say I'm actually pretty open about things like prayer in public school, but I just think, keep the subjects separate and make sure students understand when you're teaching what, right? And it's, there are schools out there teaching things about Islam and the Quran, and I don't have an issue with that, but I think if you are going to do that, you should probably teach the other world religions alongside it as well, and make sure kids know that it's religion that you're teaching them and belief systems that you're teaching them. And then, when you're in science class, teach them things that scientists are writing about right now.
What about them trying to, I guess teach creationism more as fact? I mean, I know we were talking about the younger things, people, the group before. I've actually read a lot of articles about them pushing stuff like this in science class specifically, which is what most of the outrage is about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that is obviously something that I wouldn't approve of. And that's not to say that I think on the opposite end of that, there are people who think that religion should have no part in your education. I don't agree. When I was in elementary school, we had religion classes, and you could either choose Christian religious education or just general ethics class. I have no issue with that in public schools, but yeah, I get personally, I really do think that they should be separate, and that kids, when they're learning this, should understand.
So you're pro-choice on religious education, is what you're saying?
I'm pro-choice on most education things. I don't think when it comes to education, less choice is better.
I'm actually really proud of myself for this amazing segue. So one of the other question, since we're talking about this, is actually abortion rights. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if you've answered this before. If you haven't, I might have missed it. But where do you stand on?
So I did a video about abortion, and I kind of did mention that I was pro-life, but I didn't. It wasn't really about why I was pro-life. It was more just covering the abortion debate. So yeah, I personally am pro-life, and that actually is an issue where I've gone back and forth. I used to be pro-choice. Now I've started being more pro-life, and even within that, I think I still view it a lot differently than a lot of the more extreme or passionate pro-life advocates.
The traditionalists, I think, would
The
be the best word
traditionalists,
for them.
right? But I am pro-life, yes.
Okay, and where do you stand also on, I guess, immigration? Because I saw your interview with Richard Spencer, but you dealt more into, I guess, preservation of culture and kind of genetics, so just like the biological makeup more than you actually talked a little bit more about immigration. Where do you stand on that as well? Especially, I'm just not talking like refugees. I'm just talking about, I guess, the next 3.5 years of this country, possibly 7.5 years, depending on how the media screws that up again. So,
yeah, well, so I believe that immigration, like any other system of government, should exist to benefit the people of that country or safeguard their rights or prosperity. Right now, in the States at least, the immigration system is more like a welfare program than anything else. I think if you look at the history of immigration to the United States, it's clear that immigrants often do have a lot to bring to the country. And, for the most part, especially when you're looking at specific subsets of immigrants, they are extremely entrepreneurial, more educated than the native population, more wealthy than the native population, et cetera, et cetera. So I think immigration, I'm not one of those complete isolationists. I believe that, if you're an immigrant, and, that's the thing, like I grew up in Hong Kong, I was born in Canada, but I grew up in Hong Kong. Had to immigrated to the States when I was in university, had to go through the strenuous green card application process. And, my father too, he was born in Hong Kong and only came over to the West later for university. So, and I think, both of us are trying to do our best, but by our new countries. And I think, if there was an immigration system in place, like a point system, Australia and Canada are famous for having, although Canada not so much anymore, where immigrants are able to apply and they look at their skills kind of like, you would any other job application, where you're trying to bring in the people who are most likely to assimilate, have, the best knowledge of the native language skills, the most likely to find employment, especially in sectors that have shortages. So in the States, that would be overwhelmingly STEM, and who are, more likely to bring in wealth and prosperity as opposed to become a burden on the system. I see absolutely no reason why there shouldn't be immigration.
Do you think bills like, I think it was C-16, are hindering, I guess, more not so politically correct, free-thinking people to coming over to Canada? Do you think that's actually helping the country or hurting them more?
I'm sorry, what was the
Bill C-16, the one with where they could add, I think it was misgendering someone or not using someone's preferred gender.
Yeah.
I think I don't want to say it's a hate crime, but it's a form of verbal harassment or attack or something. I don't know the wording. It's a little too vague for me, but I'm just wondering what you think about that.
In general, or in regards to immigration?
Well, my question is, do you think stuff like that's actually hurting people from coming over to Canada when they're seeing more of this, I guess, totalitarian, this thought policing, and especially with, Asians especially, we both have personal experience. We don't like to have, we don't like to be told what to think. At least it already happens with our parents and the rest of the country.
Not to mention that, even though they tend to vote overwhelmingly liberal, Asians are extremely conservative socially, right? Which, and then these policies are very, very socially liberal. So I tried to explain non-binary genders to my dad once, and it was a disaster. I think it won't be a deterrent for certain types of immigrants, but those may not necessarily be the ones that we want, right? Because ideally, you would want an immigrant who embraces the cultural values of the country. So, in the United States, at least, you would think that would be freedom of speech, individual liberty, and stuff like that. So, the more you impose these totalitarian regimes, well, someone who doesn't really care much for freedom might be okay with it. But are those the values we really want to be bringing in? So, it's too bad, because I don't think those are the laws we should be passing in Canada either. And, disappointingly enough, people who actually do appreciate freedom, who might otherwise want to come to Canada, will probably look at that and say, no, thank you. I'm just going to try to go to these states instead, because at least they seem to still have more of a chance for free speech there.
Are you afraid at all that people are going to start leaving the country, coming over to the U.S. or just other
Actually, I saw this comment on one of my videos, which I thought was a great idea. There should just be this switch, right? All of the freedom-loving capitalists should go to the States, and all the socialists can just go over to Canada, right? We can just segregate ourselves based on that.
That'd actually be amazing. I would not mind that.
Right?
I was watching Turning Point Canada, a bunch of their interviews. They had Tommy Lahren and obviously Ben Shapiro and everyone up there to do it. And I didn't realize there were actually a huge amount of conservatives in Canada. I think they're concentrated a little bit more because I know you have kind of a wasteland of nothing in the middle that.
Yeah. I mean, Stephen Harper was our conservative prime minister for the longest time, right? So, and I think just really like outside of maybe like Quebec, Ontario a little bit, BC. Yeah, it's actually a pretty conservative country, but yeah, let's do it. Let's do the switch. You know, all of the celebrities who said they were gonna leave if Trump won, they actually can leave, go to Canada, and then like all the freedom loving Canadians can go down. I think it could work. I really do.
Yeah, we have guns and possibly marijuana soon. So I mean, what more could you want, right?
Exactly. Although Canada might have marijuana sooner. So
really,
according to Trudeau, yeah, I think it's like 2018 that he was gonna pass a recreational marijuana. Like, no one quote me on that because like Trudeau, yeah, like I mean I haven't really been following it very closely, but I'm pretty sure he's trying to get that on the books.
It just became legal in Nevada, so Las Vegas has been booming up like crazy, and it's coming to DC and everything soon. So I feel like once it hits kind of the few major cities, and you'll see the benefits of it. I think it's going to sweep. I really don't think Trump cares too much about marijuana, to be honest.
Does either. No.
I think Jeff Sessions is more on the vigilant war on drugs, sort of. We've obviously been losing for how many decades now. I feel like we're
that's the thing. Like I feel like I'm kind of more like Trump on that. Like a lot of people my age are very like pro legalization and like they're really passionate about it. I'm pro legalization from a libertarian standpoint, even though like I would discourage drug use just like I discourage drinking heavily or something like that, just from like a health perspective. But again, I think that's something each individual should have the choice to say yes or no to. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't see Trump making a huge deal out of it either way. But I mean, hopefully he respects states' rights in that respect.
That's the one thing I'm scared about, because you're going to have the outsides of the country. You're going to have Washington and California and Maryland, New York, pretty much just kind of going all the way around. Then you're going to just have all the red states in the middle. It's gonna be a little bit weird if you can smoke in Maryland, but you can't do anything for a long time until you get to Colorado, then California, then you're fine again.
It's kind of like the inverse of gun laws when you think about it, right?
Oh, yeah.
You can either have gun or weed. Very few places allow you to have both.
Well, you can have guns out here. Like New York it's severely limited on what you can do. Transportation's I'm in DC's. It's pretty much, unless you're a federal officer or you're somehow appointed by the government, you can carry. But Maryland's actually not that bad. Maryland has they're called feel good laws here. Essentially, they don't really do anything, but it seems like they do. So, like, you have 30 rounds in a magazine. You can't legally buy that in Maryland, right? But I can literally drive 6 minutes south to Virginia, buy 100-round magazines, come back up, and it's perfectly legal. You just cannot take ownership in this country. In this state. So
that's funny. I know in like Quebec, at least, I'm not sure if this is a federal Canadian regulation, but you can only have 5 rounds in a magazine.
Yeah, so California is moving to 10. New York's already at 10. And I think in California, I think it was the beginning of July. It might have been postponed, hopefully, or just completely eradicated off the table. But essentially, if you have more than 10 rounds, even if it's grandfathered in, it's considered a federal crime. Which is, I feel like Canada, if you can somehow disconnect, California, if you can somehow disconnect it and attach it to Canada, I think we'd be a lot better off in this country.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Let's do that switch. Absolutely.
It's really funny because California actually banned the state-sponsored travel to a lot of countries in the Bible Belt.
Yeah.
If you've read about that, but then they asked the federal government for help with all of their debt, like right after. This is just the most meme-worthy year of my life, and I'm so glad to be alive right now. So one thing actually I heard you talk about, I think this was you had an interview with someone, I didn't see it, but you were doing a live stream question and answer thing.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And one thing, so you're talking about responsible genetics, right? Kind of passing on the genes. Do you think that needs to be a little bit more mainstream, exactly, or should that still be left up to the merits of I get not the individual, but the couples actually doing it. This is such an interesting topic for me.
Well, I don't believe in a state-sponsored breeding program, if that's what you're asking me.
More mainstream, as in not like a state sponsored, more push for awareness into this sort of field or this avenue.
Right. Well, I've watched quite a few documentaries about eugenics programs and what they were doing and throughout the 1900s, and they were doing things like forced sterilization of insane asylum patients and stuff like that. I think that's an interesting concept because in the first place, I don't think insane asylum patients can give informed consent. So how they would get pregnant in the first place is I'm not sure what they were doing in those places, but I think that in the West, and I think we kind of touched about this a little bit from last time we spoke from a different perspective, but like in the West, relationships have very much become of like a feel good sort of just like purely emotional aspect. So I guess in Asian families, I know especially like Chinese culture, which I'm most familiar with, there's a lot more pragmatism when it comes to families. Like you're not just like, oh, I love you for now. Like you're kind of like life partners in every sense of the word, right? And when you're choosing your partner, it's not just who do you have the warm and fuzzies for, but it's also you think about things like, okay, like who can I have, I guess, the most stable life with? Who do I have the most common cultural values with? So like that's all really important, and those are things that we don't talk about really anymore. It's just kind of like who makes you get butterflies, that sort of thing. Look at the divorce rate, see how that gets us. But another thing I think that we don't really think about so much anymore, and not that's to say no one does, because I think for some people it is kind of something in the back of our mind, but it's like wanting to give your children the best you can, sending them into life. And I think part of that is at least part of it is genetics. And so like I know personally, if I wanted to marry someone, wanted to have kids with someone, but then we get a genetic testing, or I find out there's a large history of cancer within their family or something like that, predisposition toward a lot of hereditary ailments, I would be hesitant and maybe look into something more like adoption or something like that. And that's just for me personally, because I can't imagine anything more heartbreaking than having to deal with that.
Yeah, so this is I want to say it's a funny story now. It wasn't about 3 weeks ago, well, 2 weeks ago when it happened. So I actually came back from a trip, and I was I was talking to my mom, and she's like, all right, well, are you dating anyone now? I'm like, no. She's like, okay, don't worry, I got you. Like that's all she said. So I got this email at 3 o'clock in the morning. I got signed up for this South Asian dating website. Okay. And it's so embarrassing. But here's the thing though. That website literally asked for everything. Like they wanted to know my height, my weight, like how well I can grow a beard, and it's surprisingly all in there.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize. You always thought it was a little bit of a joke because you have like in India for the matrimonial places you have to submit a biodata profile, and you pretty much just go through all the genetic testing and everything anyway. But I always thought it was an actual joke. Because it's just funny because like these South Asian girls are like incredibly tiny, and she's like, what do you think of her? What do you think of her? And they're like 5'2", 5'3", and I'm like a giant at 6'1". So now it's just so fun. Now we're like, she's getting like rejection emails like your son's too tall. Like we need someone around 5'10". Like we don't want this guy to be a freak when he grows older.
Really? They want shorter? That's interesting.
They want shorter. Yeah, so like especially in India, if you're one of my friends, he's about 6'5", 6'6", and I feel so bad for him because that country is not made for anyone over maybe 6 feet at most. And doorways are smaller. They're just like he's like this tiny, he's this gigantic like bodybuilder having to try to like go through these like tiny little doors at 6'5". He can't fit in bathrooms. He can't sit on toilets. Like he can't do anything in there, and I feel so bad for him.
That's like, I feel like Asian culture would be much more like upfront about that kind of thing. Like, oh no, too tall. Don't want children that are too tall. But I mean, it's like in the West, like there's kind of like this disassociation between what your partner looks like and what your children might look like.
No, so like my mom grabbed my hand and she had this app for this website and she's trying to compare like my skin color to it because it asks if you're like it asks if you're dark, tan, and so she like compared it. She's like, okay, you're fair and wheatish. Like they need to know absolutely everything about you. And I don't know if that's heartbreaking or if it's really responsible, but I'm just somewhere.
Well, I think it's yeah, I definitely, and especially, it does kind of like take away an element of romance, right? When you're looking at this from kind of just like you as breeding stock, right? Like Rohan as breeding stock. But I guess
like cattle right now.
Yeah, it's pragmatic, and personally, like I'm less concerned about genetic traits. I mean, as long as they're not ginger, just for obvious reasons. But ugh.
I like to see a redheaded Asian now.
I gotta
put that on my list of things to see before I die.
Well, I mean, I know someone who's purely Asian can't have a ginger baby because like they don't carry the recessive gene, right? So, but if it's like maybe that kid's kids might be able to, and I don't know how that it would look weird regardless, but I mean, yeah, like for me personally, like a large part of it is like I want who's ever fathering my children to be, intelligent, healthy, ideally not flat-footed. Yeah.
You don't want any gills or like duck noses?
Yeah, no, thanks.
Man. All right. So one reason I'm actually talking about this is because I've been talking a little, well, not talking, but I guess dwelling more into the whole genetic debate within the last few months.
Mm-hmm.
And so one question I have that I've been asking people that I'm so 50-50 about. Like say you have person A who has, a high chance of, like say lung cancer, right? For whether it's like some sort of cancer, whether it's genetic and so does person B. If these two people go and get tests and they find out, well, your child's gonna have probably, 90% probability of developing cancer, and they still go ahead and have that child anyway. Should those people be held responsible? Is that mistreatment of a child? I mean, that's what I've been trying to figure out exactly, and I'm somewhere between. I'm just in the gray right now.
I think I would be in the gray right now as well, because you can't fault someone for wanting to have a child with the person they love, right? But at the same time, like I think we have, just like as an individual responsibility, you have to weigh these very uncomfortable and very hard choices. And so, I know what I would do in that situation if I was presented with those awful stats. And like, I think we just need to encourage people to look at this from a little bit more of a pragmatic situation, a little bit more of a realistic situation. I mean, like in terms of like held responsible, like obviously like no legal repercussions. Like these people are not guilty of like murder or like a child abuse because their kid got cancer, but it's, it's just like, it's a consideration that they would have to weigh. And if I were in that situation, I would not take those chances.
Yeah, I'm just trying to I guess where my logic starts to get torn apart is it essentially, let's say if two people have AIDS, right? It just it's fully developed, or and their child's gonna have the same problem. Granted, now it's not as huge as a deal as it was 10, 15 years ago, but
still,
wouldn't that essentially be considered a death sentence for a child? Or at least severely impaired life. I mean, then it's just you have one other person out with AIDS and all this. That's where I can't seem to figure this out. So I definitely like to. I know you have a little bit of knowledge in the whole genetic thing, but I'm just trying to figure out where you stand on this issue.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what I think. I think I don't know, like death sentence. That's kind of hard because at the same time, child would never have been born in the first place if not for you. I think it's hard to talk about how awful it is for the parents to have done that, but I think it is just something that going into it, parents should be made aware of and should try to act responsibly for. I'm not going to try to shame people who do things or try to impose guilt on people. I would just hope to encourage pragmatism and, thinking about things realistically and thinking about the quality of life that your child is going to be able to have, right? Because, ideally they're completely 100% healthy, happy, nothing goes wrong. But, when you're confronted with the reality that that's not going to happen, and it's, at least this sure, and it's going to be at least this severe, I think like alternatives like adoption or surrogacy, things like that really should be explored.
What about genetic editing? Because I know CRISPR is getting pretty popular now too, but what would you think about kids essentially being genetically designed to, to be a certain height? Or
I have no issues with that.
Do you think it'd be unfair for the people that can't afford that service? So essentially it would just kind of create this elite of the elite class.
I mean, we already have that sort of with people who are naturally good looking, people who are born into wealthy families.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. What a burden, Rohan. But yeah, so I mean, I think we already have that. And to say that,
I'm just telling you what my mom said, okay? That's all that matters. It's on my Indian dating profile, so.
But I mean, I think it isn't right for people to tell parents that they're unable to, do this service for their children or be this specific with their own offspring just because other people's children might be crappier by comparison, or, might be less, I don't know, less tall, less good looking, less intelligent by comparison. I don't think that's someone's place to say.
Because the scenario that's going through my mind is essentially like, if I have $1 million where I can afford to go and do this, I can essentially design a child to excel in the NFL, right? Make that like 6'5", 6'6", fast as hell, pretty much be able to just stride down the field like an ostrich or another animal with long legs that I can't think of right now. I'm just trying to, like, how wouldn't that create an imbalance? And just right now, genetics is, for all intents and purposes, completely random. You kind of win the lottery if you grow up to be a certain build, right? You can have the build of a linebacker, you can have the build of a receiver, a quarterback, or something like that. But imagine just the people that can afford it essentially creating, tens of thousands of these kids essentially designed for specific purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that would cause a little bit of an imbalance in athletics, or, pretty much anything to do with sports or anything physical at all?
Well, I mean, the thing is that, you've mentioned genetics right now is sort of, it's random. Like, as individuals, we did not control what our genetics were, but there's already a huge imbalance, right? It's not like it's an equitable society in terms of race right now. I mean, how many Asians in the NFL do you see? How many Asians, in basketball do we see? Not that many, and I think there's a pretty obvious reason for that.
Yao Ming, see, defeated your argument. You got one.
Jeremy Lin, 2.
Damn it. Okay, yeah, I don't know anything about the NBA. I was so proud of that.
Going pretty good for us with those 2, but you know what I mean. There are already huge genetic advantages that some people have over others, especially when it comes to sports. And I mean, even regardless of sports, just our society places a lot of emphasis, and I don't think it's just our society now, but like as humans, we are naturally predispositioned toward liking attractive people or seeking out attractive people. And, beauty standards have changed throughout history. It's like, during the 1950s, let's say, if you're not blonde haired, blue eyed, like huge boobs, if you're a girl, like you're just not the ideal for society. And I think that's always been the case. Some people are going to have more what we see as desirable genetic traits than others. That there's already this imbalance. And I think, actually giving people a little bit more agency in what their offspring look like might actually be a way towards solving that.
And so I've been watching so many videos. It's been a boring week for me, but I actually saw kind of a societal expectations of beauty for men and women all across the world. And one thing
that would be a cool video. I
will link it to you. You'd really like.
For sure.
It went through about 30 or 40 countries. So I mean, you're talking everything from America. They like the tall volleyball sort of build, like blonde sort of thing. Then you go. So there's I think it's a tribe in Africa. I forget exactly where, but essentially they purposely scar their body. Like they'll take knives and they have the scars all over them, and it's supposed to tell a story. And I kind of wish we had a little bit more mobility in the world. So if you have someone, like Indians prefer wheatish skin. So if someone's a little bit darker, if they could, like, let's say, move to Zimbabwe where they would really appreciate darker skin.
Yeah.
And the same thing with America. You know, if someone's a brunette, but you know, like say Czechoslovakia loves brunettes. That wasn't one of the countries. I'm just throwing it out there. You think I would love to see some sort of, some sort of study or something, some sort of documentary. Wow, it's been such a long day. July 4th really got me going here. Still sobering up. Some sort of documentary that actually follows people throughout the country to see how, I guess, these native populations would actually react to these introduced species.
That actually would be like a really interesting study, and just like kind of drawing on my own experience. Like as a Eurasian, I grew up in like Hong Kong and Singapore and Shanghai, where Eurasian features, like they're very appreciated. Like people love Eurasians in these Asian countries. And then, you know, kind of like later I moved to Canada and the United States, and just in like my experience, the way that like, I guess my own looks have been received have been very, very different in those two places. And I think that kind of does just go to show that kind of beauty is in the eye of the beholder, where like different strokes for different folks, you know, just because you're not considered what's hot in one country, that doesn't mean that it's going to be true everywhere. So I think obviously there are universal standards of beauty, not being obese, symmetry, things like that, being, you know, just like healthy looking. It's considered good looking everywhere. But in terms of like every culture does have different preferences for things like hair color, eye color, height, stuff like that.
So in China, I had a friend, well, they went to Japan. So I guess it's sort of similar, but not really. But from what they told me, so one of my friends who's white, he's a little bit taller. He went to Japan, and he essentially said people literally stopped him everywhere. They asked for pictures, and people came up to him and like shook his hand. And it's like, you know, they wanted to like, he literally got invited over to dinners to people's houses, random strangers that he did not know, like in restaurants. You know, not the best, not the most opportune time to provide, you know, ask someone to come over. But so one of the guys, like one of my friends from high school, went over there. He's Indian. And he didn't exactly get that same reception.
Yeah.
He seemed to get I guess, more confused stares than, you know, anything else. But how does that work exactly in China, or just, you know, Hong Kong?
So Hong Kong is like very metropolitan. There's a huge expat presence there. There's tons of diasporas, like a lot of Indians, Thai, Filipinos. So like Hong Kong's just kind of like a hodgepodge of different, it's kind of like New York, right? But when you actually go to mainland China, it's a different story. And it might be a little bit different now in the big cities like Beijing and Shanghai. But when I was growing up, when I was like a year or two old, we lived a little bit in Guangzhou, and then again later in Shanghai. And so my mom is blonde haired, and she's got that big frizzy Irish fro going on. And people in the streets would actually go up and like ask like to touch her hair, want to take pictures with her. Whenever we were in the grocery store, they would just start looking through our shopping basket because they wanted to see what white people bought, like what kind of groceries the whites like, and stuff like that. And yeah, there was just like this fascination because it's, you know, in China, like Shanghai at that time, maybe a little bit different now. It's been a while since I got back. There really wasn't like a lot of that. They really didn't see a lot of that firsthand, like, you know, blonde people. So, and I know one of my mom's friends, when she went to visit, she had a newborn baby, this big blue-eyed baby, and they couldn't get enough of him. Because I mean, it's a novelty.
Okay, so don't visit China as me. Got it. All right. No.
Well, actually,
I mean, it was subtle. I liked it.
I actually don't know. Like I had Indian friends that are at the international school, but I'm not really sure of like what their experiences were. Yeah, but that's interesting. Like I know by and by Chinese tend to be, I don't want to say racist, but yeah, a little bit racist toward Black people. There's this like unfamiliarity.
You know, being libertarian just bought me a bunch of romp hymns, so I'm gonna see if I can exchange that and get a ticket to China and Japan actually. Yeah,
I'm sure a lot of airline companies like accept rompers as payment.
I literally have an American flag romper just ready to go, and
that's gonna look good. It looks amazing.
I'm gonna change into it right now. Actually, it's so
do it.
So, I got jorts, jean shorts, and I bought Crocs and like the most obnoxious white socks possible. And I wore this on July. It was just wait till the pictures come out. I'll autograph one and send it to you. It's no big deal. It's all right. You don't have to thank me for it. All right. So actually, we gotta wrap up the broadcast. But thanks for having us on, and I'm sure I'm gonna get more questions because I got about 50-ish emails last time of me just asking you to ask you stuff. So
yeah, well, for sure, just like shoot me my DMs are like tricky, but yeah, like just shoot me a DM. If I don't answer, just like tag me a bunch and I'll see it eventually.
I've tried that before and it took months.
Sorry.
Right, I'll send smoke signals. I got some carrier pigeons. I'm sure we can get something going.
Yeah.